Okay, welcome to the November forecast. Obviously, I'm not at Soul Food Coffee House in Redmond, Washington, although this will be playing there for those of you who appear on the last Wednesday night of the month. That would be Halloween evening in Redmond, Washington. It's actually here the following day because of the international dateline. I am in Bali, Indonesia, recording this. I'm sorry if the sound is a bit hollow. I am in a room that has a hollow sound and the microphone isn't great. The content will be hopefully what you need. And I will be back in the States, not next month, but the following month. I will be at the December for the recording of January. A couple quick things before we get started. First of all, I want to remind you all of two things. Number one, I would like to share with you just very, very quickly my Patreon page. Now, this is patreon.com/Rick Levine. And this is where my astrology videos, trainings, teachings, and other tidbits will appear. For those of you who are getting this on YouTube, this will still continue to be on YouTube as it always has been. But here on Patreon, I'm offering other options, including a mid-month update and a weekly cosmic quickie and a monthly chart interpretation class. And if you're interested in any of these other options, go to patreon.com/Rick Levine and check it out there. Only one other thing I want to mention today, and that is my annual winter retreat at Brighton Bush Hot Springs. It seems like it's far off. This will be in January, and it will be on January 11th through 13th. Conscious creation with astrology. And this conscious creation with astrology is an annual event. I think this is my 13th year of doing it. The first 9 or 10 years I did it with my then astrology partner, Jeff Jower. But this sells out. This event is pretty much always sells out. So if you're considering or if you're thinking about it, even though it's not until the beginning of next year, check it out and get your reservation in early. This is limited to about 25 people. And for the last several years, we've filled up. So Brighton Bush, that's brightonbush.com. There's the spelling right there. BreitenBush, brightonbush.com, and that's that. So, okay, we're back here, and boy, do we have a month coming up. I've never seen a month. That's what we're looking at. November of 2018, and today is actually Halloween Day here in Bali. And this is being recorded on October 31st. And looking ahead at the month of November, I don't think I've ever seen a month with so much dramatic sign change. I mean, more than anything else, what's going on this month is that we have planets changing signs. In fact, we have Venus, Uranus, Jupiter, Mars, and the Sun, 5 planets changing signs. And it really does, it's a harbinger of a whole fresh new wave. Now, I don't want to get too political. I'm always a bit political. And this is certainly, I don't know what's going to happen on Election Day in the United States. But looking at the energy of the astrology, one way or another, it feels like there's a big change. It feels like because Jupiter moves into Sagittarius on November 8th, after having been in deep, dark, intense Scorpio, which I've been talking about since last October, Jupiter moved into Scorpio in October, and right away we were confronted with the Me Too movement and the gender equality backlash that was probably well overdue. Jupiter turned retrograde in March of this year, 2018, and then turned direct also all in Scorpio on July 11th. And on November 8th, Jupiter leaves Scorpio and heads into Sagittarius. And this is huge for two reasons. Number one, Jupiter changes signs once a year. Number two, only once every 12 years does Jupiter return to its own home sign. Jupiter in traditional astrology rules Sagittarius. I like to say that in modern astrology, Jupiter is the planet that is associated with, it hums. It's the planet that does the work of what the environment of Sagittarius sets up. And so Jupiter moves into Sagittarius on November 8th. Then next April, it whizzes through Sagittarius. By next April, it's at 24 degrees of Sagittarius. It turns direct. It backs all the way up to 14 degrees of Sagittarius. Next August, it turns direct and then moves into Capricorn next December. So we have basically almost 13 months of Jupiter in its home sign of Sagittarius, and we can expect our minds to expand. Sagittarius is the sign of the distance. Now, remember, we've been in this scorpionic phase, not only with Jupiter magnifying what's hidden, magnifying the deep, the dirty, the dark, the underbelly, the underworld. Jupiter in Scorpio has been bringing all of this stuff out into the open. Well, it's now in the open. And as Jupiter moves into Sagittarius, the vision is going to clear. I always think of in the northern latitudes, when the sun moves into Scorpio, where it is now, and it is in Scorpio until it moves into Sagittarius on November 22nd. And so right now we are still in a bit of the Scorpio energy. We have a condensation of Scorpio stuff going on. And I always think of Scorpio, first of all, it's associated with Halloween being tonight. At Halloween, the veil is thin between worlds. And Scorpio represents the other side, the other world. It represents all the things that go on without physicality attached. Because when Scorpio comes along, those leaves on the tree dry up and they're dead. The energy goes somewhere else. The energy pulls in and goes deep into the trunk of the tree. Life doesn't end. In fact, the whole phase of magic begins when the sun is in Scorpio, when any planets are in Scorpio, but it's deep and it's intense and it's not necessarily obvious, it's hidden. So here's the thing. When the sun moves into Sagittarius, though, rather than the leaves being on the trees and dead, some of them fall, it's almost like it's the time of year when there's nothing in the way. We get these big clear skies again in the north, and the trees now are barren. They're even the oak trees that tend to hold on to their leaves. And when they're dried up and brown, now they're gone. And so it's like vision is unobstructed. And this is the key to understanding Sagittarius. It's the archer aiming its arrow into the night sky or into the sky. And Sagittarius wants to go long. It wants to go far. Sagittarius is far-seeing, and it's about the distant horizon. The true Sagittarian energy sets goals. They're inspirational, they're distant, they're things that we aspire toward. And on some level, it doesn't matter whether we reach those goals. Okay, it may to many people, we set goals because we want to reach them. But after Sagittarius comes Capricorn, and with Capricorn, it's about the calculations necessary to get to the top of the mountain, to reach the goal. Whereas in Sagittarius, it's about setting the goal and putting a flag out there in the distance that becomes our guiding light, our guiding star, if you will, our pole star. And in a way, what's important is that we have that image out in the distance and that we're heading toward it. It's not about necessarily reaching it. It's not about getting to the destination. That's Capricorn. It's about the journey. Every step along the way is part of the Sagittarius journey. So as Jupiter returns to Sagittarius, we begin to see what's ahead in the distance rather than being overwhelmed by all the stuff that's coming out into the open that has been hidden, that has been kept beneath the surface. This is a huge thing, and obviously when the sun moves into Sagittarius on November 22nd, it only takes a few days for it to catch up to Jupiter, and we have the sun joining up with Jupiter on November 26th, which will be a very profound and powerful and uplifting day. And having said that and set the stage, I would like to jump into looking at the actual charts. Now, this chart that we're looking at I'm going to back this up so that this chart is for tonight, 7:00 p.m., October 31st. This is where the planets are at this moment. And I just want to point out that Venus has just, Venus is at 29 degrees of Libra, and it's just retrograding back into Libra, having been in Scorpio. We'll follow that Venus thing in just a moment, because that Venus retrograde is certainly has been playing a large part of what's been going on, and it will continue to throughout the month of November. So Venus is just in the process of changing signs, backing into retrograding back into Libra. We have Uranus at 0 degrees of Taurus retrograding, and it retrogrades back into Aries on November 7th. It only has a quarter of a degree to go, but Uranus moves quite slowly compared to Venus. So it'll take Uranus a week before it changes signs and it dips back into Aries. We'll talk more about that in a moment. On the other hand, we have Mercury, which is direct, and Mercury has just moved into Sagittarius. Mercury will become another piece that we'll be talking about, because when Venus ends her retrograde dance on November 16th, on November 16th, I'm realizing that I'm looking at dates done here for Bali, and my dates are all off by a half a day because we're 12 hours ahead of Eastern time. And so the dates that I'm giving you will all be within a day, and you can look them up. I'll do my best to adjust them on the fly. But Venus turns direct on the 16th, on the same day that Mercury turns retrograde. So we have this kind of passing of the baton from Venus's retrograde into Mercury's retrograde that occurs mid-month, and it keeps that backward swirl of energy going. So let me take the aspects of the moon away, because they are just busy making. And so we're going to go displayed points, and we're simply going to say no moon, and that cleans it up a little bit. So one of the significant things that happens when a planet turns retrograde is that it repeats certain aspects. In other words, if you have a planet in your chart, and a transiting planet goes over it and then back over it and then over it again when it turns direct, it emphasizes that energy, which is the importance of retrogrades. Now, Venus, actually, we're going to follow Venus here for a moment, because Venus entered Scorpio back at the beginning of September. And Venus, by September 12th, Venus moving into Scorpio, went opposite Uranus, which then was at 2 degrees of Scorpio. Uranus has since turned retrograde and is backed up a couple of degrees. So on September 12, Venus opposed Uranus for the first of 3 times. Venus moved all the way up to about 10 degrees of Scorpio. And then on October 6th, Venus turned retrograde. And as it retrograded through October, Venus actually, let's back this up just another day, Venus on October 31st, between the 30th and 31st, Venus at backed up to 0 degrees of Scorpio, where it actually opposed Uranus for the second of 3 times. So right now, tonight, we have Venus opposing Uranus. And then Venus backs into Libra. That's on the 1st of November. And Venus continues. This is set up for in the evening. I can change this to midday, so these will make a little more sense. So Venus backs up into, there's Venus in Scorpio on the 31st. It backs up into Libra on November 1st. Meanwhile, Uranus, which is backing up just slightly day by day, Uranus here is at 0 degrees Taurus in 11 minutes. And just follow that Uranus for a moment. Uranus continues to back up, and by November 7th, boom, Uranus backs into Aries. Can you see that? Uranus on the 5th, it shows here late on the 6th, but it's the 6th early on the 7th, depending on where you live on the round planet, the spherical planet, not flat Earth, on the round planet Earth. Uranus backs up into Aries. And that Uranus in Aries stays there all the way through the spring. In fact, Uranus first moved into Taurus back in May. It turned retrograde in August at about 2.5 degrees of Taurus, backs into Aries on November 7th, and then it turns direct at about 28.5 degrees of Aries on January 7th of next year, of 2019. And then on March 6th of 2019, it returns to Taurus. Uranus returns to Taurus, where it stays all the way through 2025 when it moves into Gemini. It's a little bit beyond where we want to go today. What's significant about this, and why I'm spending time on this, is because if we follow Venus, which retrogrades, Venus retrogrades all the way back to 25 degrees of Libra. There we can see it right there toward the middle of November, and on the 16th of November, Venus turns direct. There it is right there, turning direct. And as Venus turns direct in Libra, it then begins to move forward. Uranus has backed up into Aries, and that Venus will continue to move forward through November. And just before she re-enters Scorpio on December 3rd, that Venus will then oppose Uranus on November 30th for the 3rd and final time. And so you can see that right there, that Venus is opposing it. So what the significant thing about this is that Venus opposing Uranus is an electric aspect. Venus is what we like. It's what we love. It's how we love. It's what we're attracted to. It's what we're not attracted to, what we're repulsed for. It certainly is the pleasure principle. Uranus is the planet of electrical sudden change. It's rebellious. It's unconventional. It's out of the box. Normally, Venus opposes Uranus for about a day or 2 or 3, once every year and a half, roughly. However, this time, Venus opposed Uranus on September 12th, retrograded, opposed Uranus again now on October 31st, and then goes direct, and then it opposes it a third and final time at the end of the month on November 30th, December 1st. So what happens is that we can look at these three events distinct in time. And if you go back to your day timer or your Outlook or your calendar program, and you look at what you were doing and what was going on in your life back in mid-September, and then around now, and then projected forward toward the end of the month, you might get a feeling of the electrical sudden changes in what you like, or in your money situation, or in your relationship, because oppositions often show up as relationships. So this Venus opposition is very significant. Now I want to come back to the beginning of the month, back to the beginning of November, and just follow through with some key dates of things that are going on. We've already mentioned the Venus moving into Libra, where it's almost like we get a remediation course on how to keep things in balance. It doesn't mean things are in balance. It means that we like the idea of finding and restoring balance. And I think it's significant that that Venus is in Libra through this election day period, when we, in fact, have a chance to restore balance to what's been going on in the country. Uranus backs into Aries. We mentioned that already. But at the same time, we have Jupiter that is getting ready to change signs. And I said at the beginning of this broadcast that we have lots of planets changing signs this month. We have Venus, the Sun, Jupiter, Mercury, Mars, and maybe Mercury doesn't. No, Mercury does not, but Uranus does, and of course Jupiter does. Oh, and the North Node. The nodes actually are reversing, and the nodes are hanging out right now at about 0 degrees of Aquarius Leo, and they are in the process of backing into the axis of Capricorn and Cancer. The interesting thing is that as each planet hits that 29 degree, 0 degree, whether it's going direct, or the 0 degree back to 29 degrees if it's retrograding, it's going to form other aspects with other planets also at the changing signs at the cuspal points. And so we have Jupiter, as it's ready to change signs, is making an annoying quincunx with Uranus. And that quincunx with Uranus occurs on November 8th. And this is right around the time of the new moon. Oh, we lost the moon completely. Let's come back to displayed points. What happened to our moon? I meant to take out the aspects to the moon, not the entire planet, or not the moon. There we are right there. So we want to stop here for a moment and back up so that we can see that on November 7th, and I'll get this as close as I can here. Oh, there it is right there. On November 7th at about 8 a.m., we have the new moon. That new moon occurs in Scorpio, but this is a very powerful new moon. This is the day after Election Day in the United States. And I must say, we need to back this up just another moment, because coming into Election Day is on Tuesday. And on Tuesday, we have the sun, that's Tuesday, November 6th. We have the sun forming an exact trine with Neptune. We can see that trine is exact late in the day on the 5th or early in the day on the 6th, depending upon where you are. But the sun trine Neptune can work in one of two ways. The one way, it can be illusion and confusion and deception, sneak into whatever our reality is. That would be frightening, and that's certainly potential. But the other side is that Neptune is also the planet of our highest ideals and dreams, and it's our imagination. And when the sun trines Neptune, it may be that we are inspired, that we see the potential, the hope for what is possible, and perhaps in going out and voting, at least in the United States, whether or not we can right all the wrongs that that this country and maybe every government is involved in some level, at least we can perhaps set the ship back into sailing in a direction that is more manageable. And again, this is my perspective. I don't care what your political perspective is. Okay, I really do. But whatever it is, you're entitled to that. Just get out and vote. But the point here is that this sun trine Neptune is very magical. It's very opening. It's very, there's an element of dream and making dreams come true. And so it's really important that we get out and vote. The other piece of this, though, is that on election day, we have, excuse me, on election day, we have Uranus retrograding back into Aries, almost as if we get a remedial course on doing things right. Remember, when Uranus was moving through Aries during that 7-year period, there was a lot of change in the world that had to do with demonstrations of people gaining control from ill-gained power, reclaiming the power from dictators. There was a lot of movement in civil rights, in gender rights. There was a lot of movement even in areas of gun control, of environmental issues, that as Uranus moved into Taurus, it seems like have been largely dismantled or are being dismantled. And I find it interesting that Uranus backing up into Aries on election day may be saying you get a remedial course, you get a chance to get it right. And I'm not saying that it will make everything right, but again, this is what I'm projecting, and I totally own my projections onto this chart, because on top of that, we have that new moon the day after election, which is, and not only a new moon, but that new moon is also on the same day that Jupiter moves into Sagittarius. And it's almost like, once again, we have hope. There's many people who have lost hope. Many people of color, many people of different nationalities, many immigrants and immigrant families, many people who are sexually driven in ways that are, how do we say this, offensive to some of the people who seem to be in power. We have, the ill treatment and potentially getting worse, of the whole transgender and gay community, and the whole alternative gender equality, gender fluid world that I think is certainly part of many people's hopelessness right now. And as that Jupiter moves into Sagittarius, it's almost like, there's a potential, there's a possibility. Maybe things aren't as bad as we thought they were. And in fact, on November 9th, just also after Election Day, we're running into a whole new situation when after the new moon in Scorpio, which is still intense and still has to do with power and power struggles, the moon moves into Sagittarius, and the moon joins up with Jupiter and with Mercury. And on that day, a couple days on Friday after Election Day, Thursday, Friday, we have a Venus-Mars trine, which kind of creates and establishes some equality or some equanimity when it comes to gender issues, Venus being associated with the feminine or with yin, and Mars being associated with the masculine or yang. And here in trine, they are saying it's time that we created some balance or reestablished some balance. As we move on, by November 11th, 12th, we have some action going that doesn't show up here, but there's some stress that comes in from a half square from Mercury to Venus, and a half square from the Sun to Saturn, to the 11th, 12th, 13th. But watch Mars here as we sneak up onto the 16th, which is a total game changer day. On the 16th, we have Mars changing signs. I'm going to go back to the 15th. We have Mars changing signs. Actually, the moon and Mars are traveling together here for a few hours, and they're both moving from Aquarius into Pisces. We'll talk about that in just a moment. So that's one piece. The second piece is that Venus, which has been retrograde since October 10th, did I say? I had the date here somewhere. Venus, which has been retrograde since October 10th, since October 6th. I'm sorry, that's why I kept looking. I knew it wasn't right. Venus, which has been retrograde since October 6th, on November 16th, Venus turns direct. And just a few hours after Venus turns direct, Mercury in mid-Sagittarius, which has been slowing down, Mercury begins its retrograde phase, and Mercury stays retrograde for 3 weeks, and we'll follow that up through the end of the month in a moment. But there's this sense of the retrograde Venus, which has been about emotions and feelings. Now we have the intellect coming into the picture and having to revisit some of the spaces that we had already been through back in October and through the first part of November. And that retrograde Mercury becomes a key piece to the rest of the month. And yet the same day, Mars moves into Pisces. Now, Mars moving into Pisces is kind of like someone slipping some LSD into the drink of Mars, and all of a sudden Mars has this incredibly expanded, wide open vision, but it's not sure where the hell it is. I sometimes think of Mars in Pisces as being all dressed up and ready to go to a party, but not knowing where the party is and not being able to find the invitation. Mars can be a bit disoriented in Pisces. It also can be very strong if one acknowledges that even Mars doesn't always need to know where it's going. That if we can accept the fact that we don't necessarily need to be goal-oriented like we were when Mars was in Capricorn, calculating and figuring out how we're going to reach our goals, or when Mars was in Aquarius and our goals were maybe more eccentric or more out of the box, but we still were going somewhere. And as Mars moves into Pisces, we have to adjust to the fact that we may not know where we're going. And that's just fine. Why? Because Mars in Pisces is the spiritual warrior. It's the person who, instead of is fighting real battles to conquer lands, to get to new places, to explore new directions, instead Mars is moving into the metaphysical realms, into the spiritual dimensions, and it's fighting for anything. It's fighting for its right to use imagination and to use spirituality as a tool and to develop that skill. So we have Mars in Pisces for about 6 weeks. And so it will carry us through the rest of November, which kind of, in a way, goes along a little bit with this Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius. Remember, Jupiter is in his home sign. Jupiter is feeling incredibly powerful right now. Mercury, even though it's retrograde, it's backing up closer to the Earth. It's gaining in power, even though it's not gaining in direction in new territory. Oddly enough, Jupiter in Sagittarius wants to expand into new territory. Mercury retrograde wants to go inward, but it's in Sagittarius, so it wants to grow philosophically. It wants to grow mentally by traveling through the same territory again. And then we add onto that Mars in Pisces. And it's like, we ain't going nowhere out in the real world right now. We're creating an entire new existence within the realms of imagination, dreams, etc., which hopefully we can begin to manifest once Mercury turns direct and once Mars moves into Aries and forcefully takes that energy and moves it forward. There's a wonderful quote from the French author Marcel Proust, who wrote, and this is a paraphrase, that the only true journey occurs by seeing the same place through many eyes. And in a way, that becomes the underpinning of the rest of the month of November, is that we're traveling into new territory, but not so much out there. We're traveling into new territory in here, and we have an opportunity and a chance to really develop our psychic powers, our dream, our ability to dream lucidly, to remember our dreams, and to use all this material as grist for the mill once Mercury turns direct and once Mars moves into Aries in December. So the other piece of this is that by the 20th, Mars in Pisces. Now remember, in ancient astrology, Jupiter did double duty. Jupiter was the planetary ruler of both Sagittarius and Pisces. We moderners give Neptune to Pisces, but Jupiter still got a finger in that pie. We can't take that away from Jupiter. And so when Mars moves into Pisces, it creates a square with Jupiter. That's exact just a couple of days after it moves into Pisces on November 20. And that square between warrior Mars and overindulgent, expansive, big-thinking, bombastic, philosophical Jupiter in adventurous, philandering, chivalrous, cavalier Sagittarius is a bit about overdoing. We can get overexcited. We can get so charged up by what's possible that we trash it all. We have to be really careful toward that middle of November that we don't just think that anything we dream, anything that we imagine, anything that we think can happen. It can't. And it may take some time to learn that, but we need to pay attention to this Jupiter expansion of Mars, our physical energy, so that we don't overindulge, overexpand, fill in the blank with whatever word you want. Then on the 22nd, we're still back here on the 16th. There on the 22nd, we have the sun moving from Scorpio into Sagittarius, confirming the fact that we are now in a season that we are now in a month that is changing seasons. Remember, the mutable signs, Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces, are all about the changing of one season into another. Gemini changes spring into summer, and it begins at the summer solstice. Virgo is the changing of summer into autumn, and that occurs just before the equinox, at least in the northern hemisphere, the autumn equinox. Sagittarius occurs at the end of autumn, and it occurs just prior to in the northern hemisphere, the winter solstice. Obviously, in the southern hemisphere, it's the summer solstice. But as the sun moves into Sagittarius this year, the sun moves into Sagittarius every year toward the end of November, and the energies shift. We become hopeful. In the United States, we have this weird holiday we call Thanksgiving, where we celebrate potential and hope and foreigners coming from another land, and the welcoming and the interactions between cultures that are so different, and the Native Americans feeding and taking care of the pilgrims, and the pilgrims being so thankful, and this whole thing. And this is all Sagittarian energy that's about fellowship and good feelings and all these wonderful things, but it's bullshit. You see, Thanksgiving is the Sagittarian holiday. It's the first Thor's Day, or Jupiter's Day. It's the first day of Jupiter, that's a Thursday, after the sun moves into Sagittarius. And all those things that I said about Thanksgiving in America and Thanksgiving are true, except the whole premise that it's built on is not exactly correct, because we somehow forget about the part that there were fabulous people living here and we trashed them. And it wasn't just about fellowship. It was about taking from them and then eliminating them. So I don't want to go down that road. It's just a very important part of Sagittarius energy, in as much as Sagittarius often has a hard time with the shadow. Look, it's coming out of Scorpio, where it was all shadow. Scorpio is the deep, the dark, the underworld. And when the sun moves into Sagittarius, we're so thankful that we're coming out of the shadow that we forget that there's a dark side to anything. And so we tend to only focus on the upper and the outer and the expansive and the generous and the wonderful and all these uplifting ascension type things. And that happens every year when the sun moves into Sagittarius. But this year, the sun moves into Sagittarius and it immediately contacts Jupiter. Now, the sun and Jupiter line up once a year, but this year they do it in Jupiter's home sign. And that lineup, which I mentioned earlier, occurs on November 26th, because the sun moves about a degree a day. And there's the sun at 1 degree, and there's the sun at 2, and there on the 25th and 26th, the sun actually lines up with Jupiter. And this is one of those days when the opportunities can look so great that we reach so far for them that we lose our bearings and we fall. You know, in the old merry-go-rounds, if you were on the outer rim of the merry-go-round and you were on one of those horses that go up and down, if you were lucky enough that the horse was going up right around the time that you reached the ring and you extended yourself and you reached, and if you got a gold ring or brass ring, you would actually get another ride on the merry-go-round or some prize. The problem is that if you weren't on the upside of your cycle and you reached too far, you could fall right off your horse. The opportunity of Jupiter is that when we reach for it, whether we make it or not, it opens up another whole realm of possibilities that didn't exist prior. The downside is that if we panic and feel like we have to make everything work and we reach too far, that we can actually lose our balance and lose position. But look at what's happening here. We have Jupiter coming into the sun, lining up with the sun on the 26th. Meanwhile, we have Mercury retrograding, and Mercury comes between the Earth and the sun on November 27th, and then Mercury lines up with Jupiter on the 28th. I'll play this through over the course of those 3 days and watch. Let's back this up even a day. So here we have the sun moving toward Jupiter and then passing it. And then we have Mercury moving back toward what will be first the sun and then Jupiter. And here it is. There's the sun. Now there's Mercury flipping, going past the sun. Mercury's inferior conjunction with the sun, it actually comes between the Earth and the sun. And then the following day, it lines up with Jupiter. This is a tremendous opportunity for creating goals, for establishing intentions, for setting up the idea of what we want to do. And some of that actually would have been best if we set into place, and I'm going to back this up. I got a little bit ahead of myself, and we want to go back to the full moon in Gemini. That is on the, where'd that go? It's on the 23rd, and it occurs at 0 degrees of Gemini. So we want to back that up just a touch by a couple of hours. There is the sun. We can actually do this just by an hour. Come on, by an hour, an hour, an hour. There we go. And there's the sun at 1:04. There's the sun right there. And we can now do this by the minute. And the sun, we want the sun to be at exactly the same degree. There's the, as the moon, there's the moon at 1 degree and 56 minutes. And so we have the full moon on the night of November 22nd or early in the morning on the 23rd, again, depending on what time zone you're in. If you're in Eastern time, this will occur early on the 23rd, but in Seattle, it will occur at 11:28 p.m. on the 22nd. This full moon is incredibly powerful because it sets up the intentions that normally we make intentions at the new moon. And we certainly can do that back with the moon in Scorpio, the new moon in Scorpio. But here at this full moon, something else is going on because we actually have the sun in a starting phase. It's almost like the sun is in a new moon phase with Jupiter, but it's not the moon, it's the sun. And so this full moon, which is opposing the sun, Jupiter, and coming up to oppose Mercury, and it's squaring Mars, we might be energetically challenged because there's so much to do with that moon in Gemini. But as we follow this forward an hour at a time, that moon first opposes the sun, and there's a culmination of ideas, of thoughts, and yet it's so much because the moon then opposes Jupiter just a couple of hours later, and then it squares Mars, and then that moon will actually, now I'm going to go back to doing this a day at a time rather than an hour at a time, and as we move forward now, we can see how the moon actually, move that a day at a time, and we can see how the moon moves out of the way pretty quickly, but the sun, Jupiter, and Mercury kind of come together, first the sun, then Mercury, and this is like a time to set intentions. It's a time to hone our plans, and I think the key here is that it's wonderful to have these big, grandiose, Sagittarius, generalized plans that include conquering the universe, making everything better for everyone. But the key to success here is in narrowing our focus. Is the most successful garden grows when the gardener knows when to pare, when to prune, when to cut back. And it's not like we need to cut back a huge amount. We just need to keep a perspective on this expansive energy as all of these planets, Mercury, the Sun, and Jupiter, turn one by one square Mars in Pisces. That's kind of lost off into the ethers. Let me take the aspect points off the moon again. Aspected points, and let's just get rid of, this time we'll keep the moon on the picture, we just won't have the lines drawn to it. So as we get close to the end of the month, things are really popping. They're powerful. And again, in the United States, we move towards Thanksgiving, which is, you know, the first Jupiter's day after the sun moves into Jupiter's sign, and we still have this Jupiter-Sun conjunction, which is very powerful. In fact, now the sun is moving into a square with Mars, and we have to be a little careful here again. We actually have, we have the, let's see, where is that? It actually doesn't occur until the 1st of December, technically. But we have this toward the end of the month moving in. You can see the sun here reaching here on December 2nd, the sun reaches the exact square to Mars. But as that last few days in November, the sun is pushing toward that square to Mars, and Mars has already been activated by the square from Mercury. There's this whole sense of needing to just keep things in perspective and not going too far out on a limb. The 28th, the Mercury lined up with Jupiter is very powerful, again, for setting intentions. And I think that we're coming into a holiday season that's a bit different than ones in the past, because regardless of where we are in our individual lives, regardless of our personal conditions, it's almost like we're trying to create hope. Whether things are perfect or not, whether our lives are even functioning the way we want them to or not, all this energy is about creating a mental image of what could be possible in the future. It's about what could be possible in the future. and bringing that into reality, realizing that it's not going to happen overnight. And as I said, overnight, I realized that here in the tropics, the daylight becomes nighttime very quickly because the sun is directly overhead at noon. And I started this when the sun was out. And now, as you can see through my patio door, that it's just approaching nighttime here. And we've come to the end of our little run. So I'd like to leave you with the thought that when the sun, when Jupiter, when the planets move into Sagittarius, Mercury turns retrograde, there's this whole dance between the Sagittarius and Pisces. Once Mars moves into Pisces, Venus is now moving direct by the end of the month. We have glimmers of hope. And we have to be careful with hope, because I have some Buddhist friends who refer to hope as the tyranny of hope. I mean, having hope is a wonderful thing, but what it does is it takes our attention away from the present moment. Sagittarius is really good about projecting into the future. That's what Sagittarius does. It plans the adventure. It thinks about what can happen. It imagines what's over the next horizon. It thinks about exploring the other side of the world or the other side of the galaxy, but it's into the future. All of that is wonderful, but we live in the present moment. And so it's very important that when we have all of the Sagittarius energy kicking up a storm, and even the sun moving into Sagittarius and lining up with Jupiter, kind of making that almost like Sagittarius on steroids, it's like really powerful. We have to be careful that we don't fool ourselves into thinking that there are no shadows, into thinking that everything is cool, because everything is not cool. Everything is never always cool. And so particularly through November, as we get glimmers of hope, and as we don't want to be captured by this tyranny of things will be better in the future, so I don't have to do anything about them now in the present. That's not true. The only time we get to do anything positive in our lives is right now, in the present. This is a concept of Dzogchen Buddhism that says you can do all the practicing you want, all the spiritual training and practicing and meditating. The only time anyone has ever been enlightened is in the present moment. And so I end the talk this evening on bringing attention back to the present moment. We can have awareness. Awareness is great. Awareness is wonderful. In fact, there's nothing we can ever change in the world except our awareness. And when our awareness changes, everything changes. Our behavior changes, how we interact with people changes. And that's what November is about. As Jupiter moves into Sagittarius, Mercury is already there. As the sun moves into Sagittarius, the question becomes, how can I expand my awareness without getting trapped into believing that everything will be okay sometime in the future, which inspires me to take action in the present moment. So here we are. Have a great month. For those of you on Patreon, I'll see you in a couple of weeks for my mid-month update. And for the rest of you, enjoy the month and remember to continue to think cosmically, but act locally. I'm Rick Levine.